Yeah.
I'm not seeing like a 20-second delayed version of you. Yeah. So I feel like I can react to things like
a normal conversation.
PD jumps up or something, and I'm not like 20 seconds behind on any kind of reaction to seeing that.
Yeah.
It's just kind of nice. Yeah.
With that intro, we are live for episode 46 of Trek Live. You guys know how we do it here. Live
raw.
Unedited. Conversation. What are we talking about today, Bill?
We're talking about Star Trek The Motion Picture, which is a controversial topic for a lot of people. We had a lot of conversation on Twitter through the week, and we saw all range of responses about the movie. People love it. People hate it. There's some in-between stuff. People who aren't sure, like what they think. So I'm excited to talk about this. We haven't talked about this at all. Like we've done 40. What's this episode? 46.
46.
Yep. 46. And I don't think we've spent like maybe more than 20 seconds even referencing the motion picture in any way. So it's gonna be fun to like break new ground and talk about things we haven't covered at all in the show. So, yeah. So we have Robin here, who unfortunately can't stay. He's got some things to take care of, but he's dropping some lines about things he likes about the movie. Not a huge fan of the uniforms, he says, but he's talking about some things that I know we're gonna touch on as we go, and I'll be sure to shout you out, Rob, as we hit those things. So yeah, what are your like? Well, first off, let's do this first. How's your rewatch going? Where are you at?
It's going great. I started to kind of trickle into season 2 of Next Generation. Going great.
Nice.
Rankings of season 1 are up on Twitter, so definitely go check that out, guys, and give me your list. Tell me what I did right. Tell me what I did wrong. So that's
our distant cousin out there, Trek Ranks, and us have this in common, that we love these lists.
Yes.
We love to rank. We love to see what people come up with these lists and ranking seasons and ranking shows. That's kind of what I'm about. I've been doing that, and I love that you have stepped into that territory, and it was really cool to see you do that. And there was a good bit of response on Twitter and some feedback about things they agreed with, things they disagreed with, and that's the whole fun of it. I think is getting different takes. It'd be boring if everybody's list was the same.
Exactly.
Like you had some cool stuff on there. You had I really like the top of your list. You had some like late season 1 episodes that I think are pretty underappreciated.
Yep.
Things like Coming of Age was really high on your list. The Arsenal of Freedom was really high on your list. Skin of Evil was really high on your list.
Yeah.
Angel 1, which I know is like a guilty pleasure.
Yes, guilty pleasure. Yep.
Is like towards the middle upper half, which I thought was kind of a really cool like outside the box choice. And I think I have a pretty good handle on what you like about the episode. It's campy and fun and ridiculous, and it is what it is.
Yes,
it's all a fun time if you want to have. Yeah, so I just love seeing you do that, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you do. Moving forward as you keep watching. More rankings to come.
Yeah,
and hopefully more people get on board with it. Hopefully that's what I tried to do when I was doing it. I wanted to see other people try to do the same thing, and so that there are things to compare. And hopefully we can rile up some of that and have some lists to put next to each other and see what the differences are and what people agree on and what they don't. So. Are you into season 2?
Yeah, I'm into season 2, and there's an episode I want to talk about because it kind of linked to Discovery, and it kind of made me start thinking about kind of all the captains, because it kind of ties to Captain Lorca. Episode is season 2, episode 2, where Silence has lease, and it's an episode where they kind of get trapped, and Captain Picard is gonna self-destruct the Enterprise. And it made me realize, like, when in Discovery, Captain Lorca blows up the brand instead of like having his crew have to suffer through, being like captured by the Klingons. I'm like, would a captain really do that? And then I saw this episode, and I thought about also Captain Janeway and So I think it does fit, and I think that was cool to kind of link up.
It's actually a really good point.
Yeah.
I think people's instant reaction, I know mine was when that dialogue was happening, was he really did that? But you're right. Like captains have like threatened to do this many times in the past. We never see them actually follow through with it because there's always some way that they can back out of the problem, and the bad guy always backs down. Janeway certainly, even like I think the double Janeway in Deadlock does it. She blows up her Voyager to prevent the Vidians from doing what they're going to do to the crew. And Picard is definitely going to do it, and where silence says least. He waits till the last possible second to stop it. So that's a really, really good point. That there is a neat little connection to Discovery there, and it makes that dialogue, that character revelation, a little less shocking if you think about it in the context of the other shows.
I just love this episode because, like, at the end, it's like Wesley was like, "Wow, I mean, he waited till the last second on that bluff," and then Riker's like, "Was it a bluff?"
I don't think it was.
It's cool that he has that kind of mystery. Same with Lorca, so I thought that was cool, and that's something I noticed just on my rewatch. Yep.
Yeah, that's a really cool point. It's going to be interesting to go back and watch some of this stuff again, at some point in the future for me, wink, wink, and view it all from the perspective of having seen new Trek, like you just did. There's going to be new connections to make, new things to kind of notice that connect back to Discovery, and things that maybe Discovery played off of, and I think we have a good feel for the fact that the writers on Discovery know their Trek. At least a good portion of them have a pretty deep knowledge of Star Trek. So who knows what little things are going to be discovered on rewatches of what's already there to connect to Discovery. So all kinds of things to look forward to there. And you're already in the midst of it, so you're bound to stumble into all kinds of other stuff as you keep going that kind of makes you think of Discovery and connects. Cool. Is that the last episode you watched?
That's the last episode I watched.
Cool.
Yep.
We got some really good ones coming up, some interesting ones. Season 2, I think, is a little underrated at times. There's some classics in there, some fun episodes. There's some stinkers too, I think, but I can't wait to see your ranks when it's all said and done.
Yeah, should be fun.
See how it compares to me and whoever else out there is brave enough to throw their own out there.
Yep.
So the motion picture.
Motion picture. Yep.
What are your overall impressions of the motion picture?
Overall impressions, I like it. It's got big production value. Obviously, it's got big picture feel. I think it has a lot of strong elements. But there's kind of one in particular element that kind of falls short for me, and that brings it down on my list. So that's on my just like my overall
movie ranking.
Yeah.
List.
So what about you? What are your overall thoughts?
It's a complicated movie for me. I have a lot of nostalgia with the motion picture. When I was a young kid, like as far back as I can remember, I loved the motion picture. I think the bigness of it, the music, just something about the vibe of this movie connected with me as a young kid. I'm talking like as far back as when I was in a walker. Like this movie would, I'm told, like draw me into the room. Like I'd bang into stuff trying to get to the living room to watch the movie if I heard it on the TV. So it's always kind of been there. I like it a lot. There are things in it that I really like. It's got issues that, like you, kind of drag it down towards the middle-ish of the pack for me, maybe towards the bottom half of it. But I prefer it strongly to some of the other movies out there. Like it's not in the bottom chunk. at the bottom of my Star Trek movie list would be like Nemesis and Final Frontier. They're my least favorite Star Trek movies, and I find them much more problematic than this one. I think this is a significantly better movie than them. But there are certainly things that we're going to talk about here today that I think cause it to not be a classic Star Trek movie. It's not The Wrath of Khan. It's not The Voyage Home.
Yeah.
It's not as clean as those. But it's undeniably huge. Like up until 2009 and the Kelvin timeline, it's clearly like the biggest scale Star Trek that there ever was. No other Star Trek approaches the motion picture as far as that, just sheer production value and ambition. It's a huge movie. Some of that might lead to some of the issues for me, like some of the I think maybe at times they're almost enamored with their own production value, like and they spend a little too much time focusing on those kinds of things. But there are things about it that I do like. So on the overall like spectrum, I fall on the positive end of it. I'm not a hater by any means. Where there are certainly those among the fandom who find this to be not a good movie at all. I'm not one of those people.
Yes, I'm super positive on it too.
Yeah, cool. That's good. I'm glad to hear that. I didn't really know. I know this is not a movie, like I said, we've talked about on the air at all on Trek Live. In our 46 episodes now, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about it. But even off air, just in general conversations with you, it's not a movie that we've like had extended conversations about. I didn't know coming into this like what your real feelings on it were. So I'm really interested to hear as we kind of go along, like what stands out to you, what you feel passionately about, what you don't. So yeah, what sorts of things really stand out to you as like positives? What does this movie get right?
I think it kind of it does great in kind of over like doing cool things with the senses. The visual senses looks great, obviously. Also hearing it, great score.
Great score.
Yeah, to me stands out visually. I'm a visual guy, so I like production design. All the beauty shots of the refit, and that's what really stands out to me. To me, it is a little long to get to kind of start with the story, but I think I've looked at it in that it's kind of getting the crew back together in the first half, and then it's a TOS episode in the second half. And that's how I look at it, and I like that.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with that more. The first half of the movie is definitely very focused on telling us where these characters have been, which I guess if you put yourself in the shoes of a person, and like neither one of us was around in 1979, like clamoring for a Star Trek anything after 10 years of the show being off the air. But I can only imagine that, if you're, a young adult or any kind of adult, any kind of person, kid who loved the original series and is getting this movie delivered to them, and you're just excited to see these characters again. Maybe it wasn't such a bad thing for some to kind of spend the first 35, 40 minutes of the movie just kind of like, wallowing in like seeing these people again and seeing what they've been doing for the last 10 years and how they come back into, being a family again and being a unit again. So that's part of the whole kind of discussion with this movie with me. Like if you're viewing it as something that you're just jumping right into it after you're done TOS, or you're just putting it in a vacuum, maybe you think differently than if you did in 1979 when you've really been anxious and clamoring for this. Like the emotional aspect of waiting for this for 10 years and wanting more Trek so bad. I think certain elements of this work better with that mindset. You can't really replicate that now. Like it's not to say that the movie is what it is. You only get that period of time once. When the movie comes out, it's the only time you're genuinely going to get that reaction out of people. It's not going to have that aura about it 20, 30 years later. But it's interesting to think about for me when I'm watching it. How would this have felt in 1979, 10 years after waiting for it? But no, I agree. The visual stuff in the movie is fantastic. one of the questions that I posed on Twitter was about I posted a poll asking about the fly up to the Enterprise scene, which is kind of like the iconic moment from this movie that people often talk about. It's like I don't even know how long it is. What do you think? Like 5 or 6 minutes, maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe even, yeah. Kirk and Scotty, it's long. Or in a shuttle flying up to the Enterprise, seeing it for the first time as a refitted ship, I guess, for Kirk. Does that scene work for you? Like, the question was, is that scene, the options, it was a poll, so you had to answer either it was gorgeous and heartfelt, which is like the extreme of one, and then the other extreme is it's too long and unnecessary. Like, where would you fall on that question? Does that scene work for you?
I think it works for me. I think I'm on the heartfelt side. I think there's some playful shots in that. Well, they'll reveal it, and then they'll go to kind of the side shot, and you just kind of see skirts of it, and then you finally get that big reveal. And I like to see it because that's one of my favorite ships.
Absolutely.
Favorite kind of visual effects, kind of scenes, and I love just some of the guys just kind of floating by. It's a fun experience, I think.
It is. Yeah. It is. I'm with you. It is. Yeah. It's got a retro kind of vibe to it. Like nobody in any, like, there's no way a major motion picture would take 6 minutes today and do a scene like that where they're just kind of looking, admiring every corner of the ship, guys floating by in spacesuits. Like they just wouldn't take the time. Yeah, like this is a very specific to that moment scene. And it's one of those things that if 1979 you've been waiting for this movie for 10 years and you're seeing the Enterprise for the first time on the big screen, you're not seeing the same 7 or 8 stock shots that you saw in TOS over and over and over again. Like, you're really getting to bask in this ship is beautiful and it looks real and you feel like you can touch it and it's huge. You feel like you're Kirk. I mean, you are Kirk.
You're looking at it like
you're
Kirk.
going back to Star Trek.
Yeah.
You're going back to the Enterprise for the first time in a long time. So I think from that perspective, it really works. And even within the framework of the story of this movie, I think it works. I think the point of it, I think what Robert Wise would say, I don't know. I haven't looked that much into like his take on all this, but the director, Robert Wise, I think what he would say and what I would agree with is that the purpose of this scene is all that, getting to experience it as Kirk, flying up the ship for the first time in a long time. But it's also important to the juxtaposition of seeing the Enterprise in this kind of scale where it's so huge and just like larger than life. And then an hour later when you're flying into V'Ger and they pull back and you see the little teeny tiny Enterprise flying into V'Ger, like that tells you how big this cloud is and how imposing this thing is and how big of a hurdle this thing's going to be. Like this thing that you just spent 6 or 7 minutes just staring at how big it is, and it is now this teeny tiny little micro machine looking thing flying into a ginormous cloud that it's completely enveloped in. So I think from that perspective, it kind of works and it's kind of cool. The way it plays with scale and conveys to you how big this cloud is when it gets here. So from all these different angles, it works for me, but it's also musically, it's probably the best moment Star Trek's ever given us, I think. That iconic theme and I'm just completely in favor of that scene. There's nothing about it I don't like. I could sit there and watch it on repeat, like just watch that scene over and over again with like a glass of beer in hand and just bask in the glory that is the refit Enterprise for as long as I need to. Kind of depressing, like long day at work. Like, what better to do than to pretend you're Kirk flying up to the Enterprise and gonna go off on adventures now? Like, it's a success for me. That's the least of this movie's problems as far as I'm concerned. That particular scene. So, and the results of that poll were 72% in favor, saying it was gorgeous and heartfelt. 28% said too long and unnecessary. So, glad to see the masses agree with us, I guess, on that. Yeah.
Hey, Ross, good to see you. Yes, 82 AUs large.
Yes, that's very, very big. Yeah. Actually, Dan, I know off air, you and I were talking about the differences between the theatrical cut and the director's cut.
Yep.
In the director's cut, they changed that line of dialogue to 2 AUs large, because 82 AUs is an AU is the distance between the Earth and the Sun, from what I understand.
Okay.
So 82 AUs is like completely ridiculously huge.
Yeah.
Like, so they, I guess, caught that later on and decided to trim the 8 off of that. It's actually 2 AUs in the director's cut, which is a little more like feasibly possible. But yeah.
No, Ross,
Ross,
you haven't missed. That's a good transition, though. We can talk about that.
Yes. What do you think of the uniforms, Dan?
I miss the classics. It's much more naval and beige, but I don't mind them. They just seem a lot more naval, I guess.
Yeah, they're very. It's a clear indicator that they're going to go where, like, kind of, especially early TNG, what you're watching now, like the spandex, like
the jumpsuits,
form fittings jumpsuits, there are parts of the uniforms that I like. I love Kirk's Admiral uniform at the beginning of the movie, like the white and It's like he looks really cool, and I think that's a really cool uniform, cool costume. Some of the uniforms I like better than others. I kind of like what they were trying to do with all these different variants, like short sleeves, and like some people are wearing short sleeves, some people are wearing long sleeves. When people are wearing just the regular long sleeve gray uniform, I think has like a sleekness to it, like a kind of a cool look. But I don't know. They're nowhere near my favorite uniform. They don't bother me to the extent that some people just can't get over that. Like they don't like the movie, and that's part of their real reason for really being against it. They just can't stand the uniforms. Because Ross is in favor of the motion picture uniforms.
Yeah, that's
lots
awesome.
of love for the uniforms in motion picture. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I love them. I like aspects of them, and I like the outside the box thinking, I guess, and I like the instinct to have, I guess, different variants and different kinds of uniforms. But I think some of them look better than others. I also asked that on Twitter. I put a poll out. Crew uniforms are thumbs up or thumbs down. 42% thumbs up, 58% thumbs down. So that's like 60-40 negative, which is kind of what I expected. I actually wouldn't have been surprised at all if it was more heavily weighted in the negative direction. I was pleasantly surprised that it was closer to 50-50 than I was kind of expecting. So there's also wearable tech.
Wearable tech. That's
the
kind of hinting at the future, I guess.
For sure. I mean, there's part of the costume design and part of the stuff with this movie too that I understand is there's a lot of stuff in this movie that isn't really explained in the movie, but there's a lot of like fan material. There's a lot of stuff that got put out in 1979, like explaining what things were. The belt buckle thing is supposed to be like a radiation meter. Like it's supposed to be something that's monitoring their vitals. Like there's nothing in the movie that indicates that. It's just this weird thing that looks like a belt buckle, like randomly placed. But it's a cool idea. Like it's really interesting and future forward thinking and probably practical in a situation like being out in outer space and going to all kinds of inhospitable, weird places. But that's part of the wearable tech and all the prop designs. Like I kind of like the watch. Like
the watch is cool. I like that.
Yeah. There's some cool stuff like that I think really kind of does work.
Yeah, like the spacesuits that Kirk and Spock and all those people like out in space, like
kind of floating by.
I like that too. That's cool. Yeah.
Spacesuits are definitely cool. Just the overall production design of this movie, I think, is pretty great. This movie, more than any other movie, maybe other than 09, which is on its own planet because of production reasons. And, all that time that passed. This movie really conveys that the Enterprise is big, like even on the interior.
Yes.
Like we just talked about, like the scale being emphasized in that fly up scene with Kirk and Scotty in the shuttle. But when you're in the Enterprise, like the scale of the sets, like when they're
like observation deck or Enterprise engineering.
Yes.
Yeah.
Engineering has real scale to it. That observation, I guess, is it an observation room where they're watching the video of the space station destroyed by V'ger? Like that's a huge set. Like that's not something you see in most Star Trek. Like a set of that scale, like this gigantic room where the whole crew can go.
Yeah.
Like the rec deck, the recreational deck, where when wake up Ilea, like this multi-decked area that's just like a lounge. It's so different than what you see in TOS, which everything is like for practical set reasons on TV in the 1960s. Everything's like small rooms, and you have to. That's just what the ship was conveyed to look like. You just never saw anything even remotely approaching this large scale. So I love that about the movie. I love that the Enterprise feels like a real lived-in huge place. Yep. Trying to think what else. Kind of going on. Do you have anything else on like the production design or costume design? Any other thoughts?
I just that you kind of mentioned 09. I think it's to me it's a different look and a different feel when I see visual effects in the motion picture and kind of CGI stuff. I'm torn because like my heart is always kind of leans towards practical, but I can really appreciate the visual effects in 09 and kind of beyond. Not the movie Beyond, but so yeah, that's one thing I really enjoyed was the kind of the visual effects. I'll just
the motion pictures visual effects for me have like their own kind of flair to them too. They're not done by ILM, who did most of the movies. The ILM started on 2 and didn't do 5, but did 6, like did 2, 3, 4, 6 Generations, First Contact. So all of those movies kind of have a similar feel to how the movies look from a visual effects standpoint, where this one I think has its own John Dykstra, who worked on I think 2001 The Space Odyssey, did the visual effects on this movie, and it just has a different look to it. Like everything's big and it's got like I said, the emphasis on scale is something that this movie really emphasizes with visual effects, I think. And the models are just gorgeous. Like you get so close to the models, and the every little detail just makes everything feel real. I think it really adds to this is a real thing. Like this is not like Star Trek really tries to emphasize, I think, a realness. Like it's not fantasy. It's something that we're going to get to. It's forward thinking, but not unrealistic. And I think the motion picture is maybe the best example of that because of what it emphasizes with realness from a visual effects standpoint. Certainly also the most visual effects focused movie. Like I think the most time is spent on the visual effects. The visual effects drive the story the most. Before we move into some of the character stuff, like do you? Another question that I asked was about the score. I asked, is the motion picture score the best Star Trek score? Do you agree with that? Do you think it is?
It's tough. It's definitely up there. I think that's tough, but it's definitely a great score, and it's one thing that I kind of noticed. Kind of besides the effects right off the bat, it's one of those first things that I think of when I think of the motion picture.
Me too. Yeah, I think of in the motion picture as it relates to the score. The first 25 minutes of the movie it has score continuously playing, and it's a lot of like iconic, like the Klingon theme at the very beginning with that opening scene with Klingons. The almost completely through that fly up to the Enterprise. Like there's if you pay attention to it, there's music playing the entire time, and most of it's really memorable, like tone setting music for what Star Trek's going to sound like for the next 50 years, 45 years. So the score, like you said, is something that immediately think about. Star Trek, the motion picture. Like it might be the first thing. And the other thing about it, from like a production side of it, I guess, is like there's so much time spent later on in the movie, and they're looking and kind of absorbing everything they're looking at. I think the score makes that not completely sync. Like the score keeps that stuff alive in some ways. Like the score is just so imposing and impactful and like bombastic. Like it's just so in your face, like big music, that it keeps those scenes moving to some degree. How successful it is dependent on the person. You know, your mileage might vary, but for me, it keeps those scenes manageable. The really good score. Yeah. So a couple little character bits. You know, Eileen and Decker, kind of the new characters in the movie. Their love story is pretty clearly well, Riker and Troy's story is pretty clearly just kind of an extension of that. Like, it's the same story.
Yeah.
They were together on their planet, on Ilea's planet, and Decker chose his career and flew off and did his thing. And
yeah, but he pulled up a card and didn't say goodbye. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
So, how does that work for you? Like, the movie spends a decent amount of time on this dynamic between these two characters. Like, does the movie screech to a halt when that happens for you? Does it work for you? What do you think of that whole dynamic?
It kind of works for me. I like the Decker character. Not so much the Ilia character, but I think it works. Yeah, it's a little, I don't know, a little long in the tooth for me. But it was okay. What about you?
It's okay. I like Prissy Skambata. She plays Ilia. I think she's, you know, the bald head and like the appearance is pretty iconic. Like it's pretty distinctive. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. Maybe growing up on this movie, like when I think of the motion picture, another thing I kind of think about is Ilia, like the bald-headed female character that gets zapped away and comes back as an android. Like I don't know. Like her character is something that I definitely kind of connect to the motion picture. Decker's got some interesting stuff going on. You know, having the ship ripped away from him and by Kirk, and not really having anywhere to turn. Like, what's he gonna do? He's gonna complain to Scotty and McCoy that, oh, this guy comes in and takes my ship. Like, what do you do? Like, is anybody gonna take his side? No. Like he's kind of just left holding the bag and nowhere to turn. So I'm a little mixed. I think I'd be lying if I said that the movie doesn't kind of slow down in those scenes for me. But it's not a total disaster. You know, it's you know it pays off later on. I like the Decker being the idea as stuff that comes later in the movie. I think at that point in the movie, when that happens, it kind of breathes life into the movie when it needs it. Like it adds a little dramatic tension and some pizzazz to the movie when it needed it. And the stuff that they're laying groundwork for with Decker and Ilia pays off then. Like that's when you need it. Yeah. But in the first half of the movie, when the crew's kind of getting back together and established, I'm not as big on some of the Decker Ilia stuff. I have less patience for it at that point of the movie. If that makes sense. Which character do you think stands out the best in this movie? Like when you think of this movie, like whose character do you think has the best arc, has the best story in this movie? Like, does somebody stand out to you as like, this is a good movie for this character or that character?
To me, it stands out. That's like getting kind of the three amigos back together. I like the Spock kind of arc. Just stop and then he just goes and saves the day. I like Kirk. I like him coming back to the ship. I love scenes with the Doctor, especially transporter room. Great scene, whether it be kind of over the top or not. That's just kind of McCoy a little bit. Yeah. I like the big three, I guess.
Yeah, the big three have some really good moments. I do love that scene when McCoy beams up for the first time and he's got the beard and the open-chested shirt. Like it's so 70s. It's like it's groovy. Like, it's cool in all those kinds of ways. But it's also like true. Like I love the turn at the end of the scene when McCoy like goes, okay, you know, I'm fine being here with you. If you need me, I'm here. And that's kind of what it's all kind of about, this movie, to me. Like these people that, you know, at the end of the day, this is where they belong, you know, together. So I think that's when McCoy's best stuff is, like at the beginning of the movie when he's getting reintroduced. I think as the movie goes along, he has less to do. I always think of this. There's just a little moment where they're flying through the cloud. They're in V'ger, and they're like, everybody's looking at the view screen and just kind of staring. And out of nowhere, just for no real reason, which actually kind of does make sense because he did it in the time. Like McCoy pops out of the turbo lift. He walks
onto the bridge.
What's going on? At the view screen for a few minutes. But in this movie, like in the original series, he like pops it in and he starts talking to Kirk and he comes in with his problem and he starts griping and the scene ensues. In this movie, everybody's so enamored by what's at the view screen. Everybody just looks. Everybody's looking. McCoy pops in. He looks at the view screen for a few minutes. He looks around and then he just leaves. He says nothing. Like there's no dialogue at all. He's just making his appearance, like his contractually obligated appearance on the bridge for a few minutes, and then he's like, I'm going back to sick bay. I'm done. It's clearly like we got to get him in kind of scene, but his stuff at the beginning of the movie is certainly really good. For me, it's Kirk's got a lot of good stuff. You know, finding his way back to the ship. He's been promoted, and clearly not him. He's not a desk guy. He belongs in space, doing his thing. We get a lot of the same stuff in 2. You know, he evidently goes back to a desk after this movie later at some point. And in 2, it's all about him finding his way back into the captain's chair. But his arc in this movie works. But for me, I think the most successful arc in the movie is Spock's. You know, Spock starts the movie with his Kolinar trying to purge all emotion. He wants to give a full Vulcan, no emotion whatsoever. Fails because he feels something. And by the end of the movie, after his spacewalk, which I want to talk about, he has that. My favorite scene in the movie is when he's laying in sickbay after the spacewalk, and he's giving his speech about what V'ger, after he's mind melded with V'ger, what V'ger can't do because V'ger's a machine. He can't feel. Like he holds Kirk's hand and says, "This simple feeling is beyond his comprehension." V'ger, like V'ger has no idea what this is. Two people connected, and it's a big moment for Spock because that's what Spock was trying to do. Like he was trying to become like V'ger. Like there was going to be no connection, there was going to be no emotion, no nothing other than logic. And I think that's the point where he realizes he's a little different from the rest of the. He kind of embraces his humanity from that point on. Like he's more accepting of his human side from that point on, because I think seeing what V'ger is makes him realize that that's not him. That's not the direction he needs to go in. And I think it's a combination of that and being back on the Enterprise and being back with his people, being back with Kirk and McCoy and, you know, back among humans, that he kind of realizes that this is where I belong. And it's even, to me, like it reminds me of his arc in Beyond. Beyond is all about, for Spock, him trying to realize where he belongs. Like he's struggling with, where do I go in life? Do I belong with the Vulcans? Do I belong, you know, making myself as Vulcan as possible? And in Beyond is for all these other reasons. With the Vulcans are, you know, up against it. Their backs on the mat, like they're, you know, endangered species now. Like he's got all these other motivations in Beyond, but the journey he's on is kind of the same. He's at this point in life where he's trying to decide which way to go, Vulcan or kind of embrace the human side of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up in the same place in both movies.
Mm-hmm.
He realizes at the end of the day where he belongs and who he belongs with. So Spock's story in this movie, I think, is, from a character perspective, the thing that works best for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, since his after his spacewalk, it's it feels like he's breathed new life into the character.
Yes.
Just
Exactly.
completely different because when he first comes, he's kind of really stoic and welcome aboard on the turbo lift. And he just says nothing and walks up. Yeah. So
because he still thinks he wants that. He's still holding on to that Culinar training where there's nothing. He's like a there is zero coming off of him in that first half of the movie when he has that scene in I guess, is that the observation room when they're looking, well, in the director's cut you can see the engines out the back there. It's Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. It's right after Spock's gotten there and they fixed the warp engines and they're talking about why he's there and he's giving them the background on why he came back. Even in that scene, Kirk's telling him to sit down and he's just not hearing anything. He just doesn't hear anything. There's no human connection at all. And that's a tough thing for Nimoy to play. He's playing, it's the most extreme example. It is the false assumption that a lot of people think the Vulcans are completely unemotional. People who don't understand Vulcans and don't really know Star Trek think, oh, the Vulcans have no emotions. Well, that's what Spock is in this movie for the first half. He is that. He's that version of the Vulcans, completely blank slate, nothing there. But what this movie does, I think, is explains that's it's not how it's meant to be. That's not, there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
Certainly for Spock, who is half human, but that's the extreme example that not everybody is, and probably not everybody should be. So, yeah, the Spock arc in this is very successful for me, and it's probably, along with the iconic stuff with the ship, the fly up scene and the score, all these things kind of combined for me into pushing this into safely positive, B+, it's a strong movie with some things that hinder it a little bit, keep it from being a classic territory. These are the things that build this movie up to that spot for me. So what else? What do you think of the Spock Spacewalk? That's kind of a big set piece in the movie, a big visual effects set piece, I guess, for lack of a better word.
I'm seeing kind of all this through a new lens. So it had remnants of Burnham. She does the neck pinch. She goes off on her own. Obviously, it doesn't end up like Burnham, but Spock goes kind of all out and goes for it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. It's definitely grand though. I love that's really cool, especially for the time. So I like them going big on that scene.
That's definitely the scene I think that has the most. People often compare this movie to 2001, Space Odyssey, and this is the scene that I think maybe warrants that comparison the most, the spacewalk and the psychedelic visual stuff happening.
Yeah.
It's another kind of iconic moment for this movie. I think a lot. If you see little clips of the motion picture thrown into montages that people do to kind of celebrate Star Trek anniversaries and stuff. This is it's one of the things that people always reference. Because it's a big scene in the movie. Oh, something big is happening. Stuff in it. It's got its own sense of pacing, and there's a lot of dialogue, and there's a lot of flying around looking at view screens and stuff. This is a scene where there's kind of action happening, so it's an easy scene to point to and say this is a big moment in this movie. And it has a big impact on Spock's character and kind of sets him off on that direction I was talking about a few minutes ago. So that's a highlight of the movie for me too. It's one of the better things this movie has to offer, I think.
Yeah, I think up to that point it was a little slow. So this kind of flipped the whole movie and kind of the whole direction of the story. So I think it's a
Yeah.
huge moment, just not in Star Trek, but in the movie also.
100% agree. Yep,
Yeah.
There are a couple things, like when I think of this movie too, I think of I tend to really like the first half of the movie, when, like you were talking about, when the crew's kind of coming back together.
Yep.
You know, seeing them all gathered together and picking up McCoy, Spock arriving, you know, sorting it out, getting ready to launch. Like, there's iconic like stuff for Star Trek fans in that mostly works for me. The score is really pumping; it's good. When the story starts and they first get to V'ger, and that's where the movie slows down for me. Where the emphasis is on, you know, not a lot of dialogue, not a lot of there, not kind of just admiring out the view screen, like conveying the scale of it. Like the stuff I was talking about, the reason I think they emphasize the scale of the Enterprise so much in that fly up, the inspection scene. You know, the trying to convey that this cloud is big. I think they just overplay their hand with that a little bit. I don't think they necessarily need to go on as long as they did to show us. Yeah, we know this cloud's big. Like the Enterprise is dwarfed in comparison. Like they can, that's something you can convey in a couple of shots, and I think they spend, you know, minutes doing it, and I think it kind of screeches the movie to a halt a little bit. But I think that portion of the story really kicks into gear, or a couple of times. I think when Ilea gets zapped, when the V'ger probe shows up and it takes Ilea away. I think that's a really good scene. I love the cut at the end. It's so loud, and it's like the brightness, like the blinding visual of it, and then the just that loud like screech the entire time, and then it zaps Ilea away, and then it goes away, and it's just silence. You just hear like the tricorder dropping onto the floor. Like, I like that little moment, and I think that's like a whoa, something just happened in a sea of not a lot happening. So that scene really works. That kind of kickstarts the movie a little bit, and then when the Spock spacewalk happens, it's another one that, okay, like there's something happening here. And from that point on, I think the movie kind of moves pretty well. Yeah, and it feels like, okay, we're on something here. But I think in that second half, it falls prey a couple of times to, you know, falling into these traps of not a lot happening, and maybe being a little too in love with its own visual effects, and spending too much time emphasizing, you know, what V'ger looks like from the inside, which is cool. Like I said, you know, I listen to the motion picture soundtrack. You know, when I do, I listen to those cues with through V'ger. Like, there's some really cool stuff in that portion of the movie. It's just in the context of the movie, when you're watching it, it can kind of, you can feel the pacing really come into question at that point in the movie, I think. You know, you haven't, I don't know if this is something that would connect with you, just because you haven't seen TOS like numbers of times necessarily, but there's an episode of TOS that's really similar to this movie. Are you familiar with this line of thinking? The Changeling is an episode from the second season with Nomad, the robot. It's a human probe that was sent out, and it's looking for its creator, and Kirk has to pretend to be its creator. And that's kind of what this movie is. It's a human probe that goes out, and it's coming back. It's looking for its creator. It wants to know what its mission was supposed to be, and wants to connect with whatever sent it, whatever built it, whatever created it. And so it's often talked about like that this is, you know, the story of the motion picture is really kind of a regraphing of an old TOS episode, and it's true. It's definitely true. Like there's no denying that. If you watch The Changeling and you watch this back to back, you go, man, it is kind of the same story.
Yeah.
Like the whole hurt, like the whole dilemma, the whole way to solve it is pretty much the same. But I think what saves this is just the sheer difference in the production value, like we've talked about, the different elements that are happening with bringing the crew back together. Like, there's enough different to it that I think it's not repetitive and not boring in that sense. Like, I never feel like, man, I've seen this story before. Like, there's elements of it that definitely feel that way, and I wish maybe it was a little more outside the box and a little more inventive with its story. But there's enough there as far as new stuff and tackling these characters from a new perspective 10 years later, having to bring them back together. They're at a different point in life. Like, there's enough there from that perspective to keep the movie feeling fresh as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. So it doesn't, that's something that a lot of people talk about, and I wanted to kind of just throw that in there and put my stake in the ground. Is that's not a huge issue for me.
But that happens a lot in Star Trek, though.
It does, absolutely.
It's like they rehash a bunch of stories.
100%.
Into Darkness, great example.
Exactly.
Whether it be successful or not successful. So
right.
Yeah.
Even episodes like, I don't want to go on like a big tangent about Discovery, but the episode that is most commonly, and a Groppler, Zoran, is in here, and he definitely disagrees with this. But a lot of the most commonly cited favorite episode of Discovery Season 1 is Magic to Make the Sames Man Go Mad, which is inventive in its own ways, but is also very similar to old Trek stories. Like, yes. It's the most, like, you know, it's like cause and effect. It's kind of a retooling of an old idea.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's just one example that's recent, but there's tons of that for sure, like all through Star Trek, that it's kind of like a new spin on an old idea. And we've talked about that, I think, on Trek Live, that doesn't really bother me. You know, if it's a good idea and it's a cool idea, it's interesting to see how something similar plays out with a different set of characters at a different point in the timeline. And it doesn't, yeah, time loops are a standard sci-fi trope. Yeah, it's certainly not the first time we've ever seen a time loop. And this is no different. It's an early on example of that. You know, it's the first movie that's based on 79 original episodes, and instead of doing something new, they're pulling from one of those 79. So that's probably why some people are less forgiving of it than, like, say, when Voyager kind of pulls an old cool idea out of, like, the TNG box.
Yeah.
Like, people are maybe a little more forgiving. Some people, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it doesn't bother me. It's not a huge issue for me. I have other issues with pacing and, you know, some of the stuff that happens in the second half.
Yeah, Groppler's Own makes a great point. I think that's why folks love it, the nostalgia factor.
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Rosk is asking, where do we think this ranks compared to the other films? I know we kind of touched on that in the beginning.
Yeah. For me, it's towards the middle of the pack, probably more towards the bottom of the pack than the upper half. If I had to, if I'm trying to remember in my head, I want to say I have it like 8, but that's not like the last time I graded everything, I give it a B+. So it's not it's in the upper half of Star Trek content. It's not. I certainly vastly, like I said earlier in the show, I vastly prefer this to movies like Nemesis and The Final Frontier. I think this is a better movie than that. But it's also, to me, it's the toughest one. Before you give your answer on that, I'll just say, like, for me, it's the toughest one to place on a scale for me, like, to rank, because it's like an anomaly. It's different than the other movies. It stands on its own more. It's like its own thing. It doesn't necessarily feel like part of the same series as 2 through 6 do. 2 through 6 have like a visual language that kind of runs through the 5 of those movies. There's even some story threads that kind of run from 2 to 6. So those 5 movies of the 6, I think, fit in a line a little more than this one does. So it's harder for me to kind of compare this one to the others because it's such a different beast. It's a totally different kind of movie. So what about you? Where do you?
It's definitely in the middle of the pack for me. I can't give us like a definitive number right now, but it's definitely middle of the pack. And I think I'm with you. I think it's kind of in the lower end of kind of my middle pack. But there's definitely, like all of Trek, I can find stuff that I like about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Me too. What about a letter grade? Like, I don't usually ask you for a letter grade like I tend to give.
I'd do B-, I think. I wouldn't go as far as say B+, but a B-, I think, for me is kind of where it sits.
Perfectly fair. Yeah. I think you are, I think that B- representative of, like, the masses out there. Like, I feel like that's a pretty standard grade that I think a lot of people would agree with. Yeah. That C+, B- range is probably where a lot of people are on it.
Yeah, Groppler's Orange, C+ for him.
C+. Yeah. And Ross is saying he agrees with us. Mid to low B is fair. Yeah. So I'm a little higher than that. I give it a high, at least the last time graded things.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see about the future where that goes. But that's probably going to be a pretty common answer. I think. I think there's definitely going to be some Fs out there. Some people who are very negative on it, and there are people who think. I know there are people out there who think it's the best of the movies, which is, that's not a large majority of people or anything, but there is a small corner of the fandom who think that this is like the most pure example of like Roddenberry's Trek, and it's warranting of that kind of placement.
Yeah.
I did put a poll out, the last poll that I haven't really talked about, the most simple of them, which was got a big response, got 170 votes, was just a real simple question: Star Trek Motion Picture is a good movie, true or false? And this one changed over time. There was one point pretty early on where there were like, I want to say there were like 45 or 46 votes, and it was literally 50-50. And I took a screenshot of that and I said, this is Star Trek The Motion Picture in a nutshell. It's exactly like...
So divided.
But that's not how it stayed. After 170 votes, it was exactly thirds. 67% say true, 33% say false. So that's like the Rotten Tomatoes angle of it. Like there's no telling in that true false, like up or down, like how high is up, how low is down. Like a B- is in that true territory, where maybe a C or a C+ might be in that negative territory. But I think a lot of people probably fall in that middle area where it's closer to the middle of the pack. And I saw that in a lot of the responses. There were a lot of people who were kind of struggling with where it fits, what their opinion is. So and I intentionally actually didn't put in there like Star Trek Motion Picture is a good Star Trek movie. I didn't say that. I said, is it a good movie? Like just on
movie.
The most basic level, is it a movie that works? Because I do think that sometimes is a different question. But those results are pretty overwhelming. 67% of people out of 170 folks out there said that they think it's a good movie. And I tend to agree. Any other kind of thoughts while I pull up one other thing?
I don't think so. Gulper Zorn saying, I'd love to see a Star Trek standalone film, Rogue One. I think that's a cool idea. I think anytime you can create a movie or create something that kind of serves kind of that kind of greater overall universe or storyline like Rogue One does, I think that just fills in the gaps in the universe. So I would be on board with that.
Yeah, that was something I couldn't shake at all when Rogue One came out. I was like, why can't Trek like do one story that doesn't need a series?
Yeah.
I would love to see that. There's so many corners of the timeline that I think could use just one little story to tell us like what happened. And there's a lot of cool ideas out there for something like that. So I would love to see them do that. I think it would be cool. I don't know that it'll happen in the near future. I hope. You just don't hear a whole lot about it, but we can hope. Certainly hope.
Yeah.
So another thing I threw out there on Twitter during the week that got a pretty good response was I started a sentence and I asked people to finish it. I said the single best thing about the motion picture is, and I got all kinds of ranging, different kinds of responses. Our friend Danielle at the top of my responses here, guest, old co-host and friend of the show, says that she finished the statement by saying that it somehow didn't manage to kill the franchise. So we know where she falls on the movie. She's not a big fan. She's Alex Perry, who I guess co-hosted on Trek Ranks with a few weeks ago, said that it dared to dream big and paint on a movie-sized canvas. So that's the kind of opposite side of that coin. Quite a few variations on the redesign of the Enterprise, or the Enterprise in general, the ship. A lot of people said that, which I can definitely get down with. I can agree with that. I think that kind of, you can wrap in kind of the stuff we were talking about with like the scale, the production design is a pretty rousing success with this movie. Barry Wallace says Spock crying and saying that the simple feeling speech, which I think is probably my favorite thing in the movie. And saw one other one that I thought was interesting. Gull Richard says that the Klingon redesign, which I thought was kind of funny. Not that we've talked
touchy subject.
Klingon redesign. Because it's a Klingon redesign in this movie. They changed the way the Klingons looked, which is obviously a touchy subject, like you said. A lot of love for Jared Goldsmith's music, for sure. And Balak's decoy says everything. So maybe he's one of those people. He doesn't say this, but maybe he's one of those people that has that towards the top of his list. He's obviously a fan. Wide-ranging responses. There's some other negative stuff that kind of chose not to read. Danielle, I think, kind of nailed it with people who don't like the movie. Their point often is that it's a good thing that the pacing and the style of the movie is it's a good thing that the studio didn't get like freaked out and think that Star Trek can't work on the big screen and kind of pull the plug on the whole thing. That's a pretty common argument for why the movie's not successful, and that it's so other from what Star Trek we're used to, and it's fortunate that it didn't kill the franchise. And I tend to kind of agree with that. A lot of people were not happy. It wasn't like a critical success, and didn't get great reviews at the time. It made a lot of money, but not quite what they were expecting it to do. They made this in response to Star Wars from a couple of years earlier, and this was Paramount's kind of response to that, and they wanted like a ginormous, huge blockbuster like Star Wars was, and this didn't quite get there. It was a big hit, but it was nowhere near that level of success. So it is kind of fortunate that they decided to keep going, and the response to that was Star Trek II, which was done on a much smaller scale. It was the budget on the
way smaller.
Nowhere near. And that's apparent. That's definitely obvious when you watch this and then watch the Rathacon. Rathacon's a whole different animal. It's way more done on the fly, and they had to be much more innovative with their resources and stretched much more thin, which is very similar to what TOS was, which is probably why it worked. That's kind of what TOS had to do. They were strapped and had to think outside the box and take advantage of the resources they had. And from after the motion picture on up until Kelvin Timeline, that's kind of what Trek's namesake was. That's what they did. That was their whole thing.
Real quick, Ross makes a great point before we wrap it up. The motion picture poster, so iconic. I love that poster. I love it.
Definitely my favorite Star Trek poster.
Yes.
Definitely my favorite Star Trek poster. I love it so much that when the Star Trek Beyond, that Star Trek Beyond did a poster that is kind of like a spin.
Yes,
and I loved that. It was so cool. It is such an iconic image, and it's easily my favorite Star Trek poster. So definitely agree with that. So any other closing thoughts on the movie? We covered a decent amount of stuff.
I think we did.
Does the ending work for you? Like the twist that it's, for the whole movie, you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
That it's a probe from Earth and that's Voyager 6. Like, does that, not even just that, but like, does Decker's decision work for you? Like, how does the ending of the movie land?
I think it works. Yeah, I don't know kind of what to say. I just think I think it works for me at least.
I do too. I think it's very Trek in that it's about us. Like it all comes back to us. Like the this is not just like some ambiguous mustache twirling alien baddie. Like this is us. That's coming back to haunt us. It all comes back to us. And then Decker's decision, it's a tough sell. I don't know. I mean, if you buy his connection with Ilea and on, and maybe there's some connection to be had there, and if he's that depressed about the state of his career, maybe you can get there. And if you can buy the Roddenberry vision of humanity where people are just not afraid of like advancing and evolving and trying new things and like, hey, whatever, like if you accept that conceit, I think Decker's decision can work for you. But I can also see where people are like, really, he's just gonna throw everything away and just do that, and off he goes. Like I can see both sides of it. It's I've seen the movie so many times, and I've seen it so many times since I was a little kid that it is kind of what it is, and it doesn't really bother me. And Decker's such a kind of, by that point, kind of an afterthought that, it doesn't hurt the movie as far as I'm concerned. I can get there. I can buy it.
Yes.
Yep. Grappler's Lord's asking us what's on tap for next week.
I was just going to check the schedule. On the
I think next week is our 1-year anniversary.
Okay.
So I think we're gonna I don't know that we have like a specific topic planned other than to maybe just kind of about where and maybe plans for the future, and I don't know. We'll talk about that. Yeah. So stay tuned. I'm sure we'll roll something out. We have some ideas, but not necessarily like a Trek specific topic. We might cover all kinds of stuff through it, but it's going to kind of be us talking about Trek Live and what it's done for us, and
just our experience in the past year.
Yeah, things we hope to do with it as we move into year 2. So that's where we are for right now, but we're always game to talk about whatever. If you come in and they want to talk about this or that, I'm sure we'll respond and talk about wherever the conversation takes us. So stay tuned for that.
Yep. Anyway, guys, that has been episode 46 of Trek Live. I think we had a great discussion. Chat was awesome. I think we had a good discussion about a topic that we haven't really touched on. It was cool.
Yeah.
The discussion doesn't have to stop. You can come over to Twitter, Facebook. We get a bunch of cool stuff on there. Rankings, not just Trek. We talk about other stuff too. So yeah, definitely go check that out.
We also have a Discord channel. If anybody's familiar with Discord, it's like a gaming server where Dan and I are pretty much always on. There's a few people who have participated in the show. Rob is on there. He's been on our streams many times. Danielle is in there, and it's been quiet as of late, but we definitely want to start using it more as a place to kind of have through the week kind of conversations. If you're watching something Star Trek and you want to throw something out there and just have people to talk to in a more real time, kind of more intimate setting, that's what that's kind of there for. So when the stream ends, I'll post that in the comments below, and maybe I'll throw it out there on Twitter too to see if anybody is interested in downloading Discord. It's an app you can get it on your smartphone. You can download it on your computer if that's how you watch us, or that's how you do most of your online stuff. And definitely recommend that. It's a cool place to kind of hang out and talk Trek at a moment's notice if you want.
Yep. All right. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks Ross. Thanks Crop-A-Zorn. You guys are awesome. Killing it with cool discussion. And we'll see you guys next week.
Yep. Thanks everybody.